Good evening, afternoon, night, morning. Whenever you find a way to watch, listen to this podcast, it is me, Omar Sean T. Borja, the Burger Popper. And I'm joined by a very special guest, and I'm just glad that I finally get the chance to talk to him. I know we've kind of crossed paths here and there on the timeline on Twitter X, but I'm joined by Evan Willsmore, the one of the. Are you the director, or I know that you work in player personnel with the Vegas Nighthawks? I don't know if you're the director or.
Yeah, my official title is the director of player personnel, but really all the personnel stuff is a joint job between me and the GM, which we can get into.
Okay, absolutely. Probably should have went over the exact position before we went live, but
No worries, man.
but it happens. But yeah, I mean, I'm just so excited to talk about just the indoor game and just bridging, I guess, what happens with the college game and the indoor game as well. Because as you know, those of you that listen to the podcast that follow me on social media, you know that I'm mainly a college guy, but I do enjoy watching indoor football in the spring. I mean, I'm a Duke, I almost said Duke City Gladiators. I'm a New Mexico Chupacabras fan. A little slip there. But I'm a Chupacabras fan. Love watching the league in general. I love the style of play in the indoor football league. I mean, arena football is great too, but the 50-yard game is just fun. It's a hobby. I don't do too much riding. I just have fun with it. So, I mean, I enjoy the game, but I'm just really looking forward I mean, honestly, just learning about the game and also just having you share your story on my podcast too, because I think it's inspirational. I mean, at least to me, someone who's pursuing something in sports media or sports in general, and just anyone else that's listening to, provide some inspiration.
Right on, man.
All right, so the first question too, just leading right into that, is like, can you just tell us, those listening, about your story? I know that I've seen bits and pieces here and there in the timeline interviews that you've done, and I know that you have a memoir out, which I haven't had the chance to purchase or read. But yeah, can you just tell us about your story, about where your dream started, just of working in football, and then how you got to essentially being where you're at today, the director of player personnel for the Vegas Nighthawks?
Absolutely, yeah, man. Yeah, no, my story was a lot different, I think, from most other people. I didn't grow up loving football. Didn't really grow up loving sports in general. Never thought that I was going to work in sports. Really didn't become a love or a passion for me until about eighth grade. Was when I really started getting into football more deeply, and then that continued throughout high school. And when I talk about football here specifically, getting into it, I wasn't as big on like the college game initially or even the NFL game. I think I was more of a pro football guy from the get-go, but really what sparked my interest, man, was, all of these different leagues that were kind of sparking up at the time. Like in 2019, there was the Alliance of American Football, the AAF, which was a pretty revolutionary product at that time. And then that was followed up, obviously with the revival of the XFL in 2020 under Vince McMahon, the first XFL season in 19 years. And, both those seasons got short. One was due to finances. The other was due to COVID. But that kind of laid a nice foundation for me to, get into football more. It became more tangible, I guess, through those leagues, right? So, kind of started doing, some studying on those. And eventually I worked myself into sports journalism. I was writing articles about what we've kind of labeled alternative football. Did that for a couple years. And that obviously continued to open more doors for me. Got to meet a ton of great people through that, players, coaches, executives, you name it. I mean, I don't want to say I had the all access pass, but, these guys realized like this kid knows what he's talking about, and he takes this seriously. And this is something that, he's really passionate about and he wants to see it grow. But I never wanted to be on the journalism side of it, right? I kind of used journalism as a springboard, for this next stage of my career, which is, scouting and player personnel. And that's what I always wanted to do, but obviously I knew that it was kind of a hard path to pursue. I didn't really know how to get there. And so I was just kind of doing whatever I could, right? Journalism worked out for me, but it's obviously different for some other people. And then, 2023 rolled around, that was kind of like the peak of my, again, alt football coverage, if you want to call it that. What was covering the Houston Roughnecks at the time. And again, it was a great experience, but I knew that I was ready to get out of it and start kind of, exploring different options. I felt like I had hit the ceiling, for lack of a better phrase. And the indoor football league stood out at the time. The IFL and the XFL actually had a joint partnership. The details on that are kind of iffy, right? Like some say it's personnel, some say it's marketing. But they had a partnership at the time, was the idea. And that's how I kind of found out about the indoor football league, found out, really what it was. Like I had known before, about it just because I grew up in San Diego. San Diego Strike Force were a team in that league. I'd gone to a game. Didn't really think much about it, but of course it came back around in rather memorable fashion. So in 2023, I was doing some investigation on the IFL, reached out to a couple teams, heard back from a couple different people, but the one guy that took me really seriously was Mike Davis, who, was the head coach and general manager for the team still, who's been my boss, all whatever it's been 3 years now that I've worked there, almost 3 years, I guess, 3 seasons anyway. And he we got on the phone, started talking. There was a lot of philosophy that matched up. It was pretty clear that, me and him were thinking about a lot of the same things. And that was a big deal for me because Mike, was a pretty, I guess, highly regarded coach in this league, right? He had been in the Canadian Football League for 4 years with the Saskatchewan Roughriders and then had actually left the CFL to come back to the IFL. He had taken a job with the Toronto Argonauts, but, COVID kind of, messed some of that up. And then he ended up coming down to Vegas and laying the foundation, for what has now been an extremely successful program in the IFL and what we believe is, one of the leading franchises in the league. So I guess that kind of brings me to where I'm at today. I've been in that role since August of 23, scouting, recruiting, roster management. I do a little bit of everything, right? That's kind of how it is in this league. You can't just be a one-trick pony, right? You got to be able to do multiple different things and be diverse in that sense. But I've really enjoyed it, and it's continuing to grow. And I'm excited to see, obviously, where things just continue. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just great to hear really your start in alternative football because I know a lot of people. I think for me, I just enjoy the community more with like the alternative, and I think alternative is just a weird term because like especially with like the UFL, the AAF, like you mentioned, USFL, XFL, like they're playing on the same 100-yard field. There's nothing really alternative about it other than it's in the spring. But yeah, like I think it's just so great that you were able just to cultivate like that love for the game through the AAF. Because I remember watching those games in my college dorm and like I felt the same way too. Like it was something organic. I was nowhere near any of the teams, so it just felt organic to seek to root for something from the start and not just because it's around like the NFL is. So brought back some good memories there. And I mean, it's not just memories, but I mean, just how far the spring football scene has grown, especially with indoor football.
I think the same exact thing.
But yeah. So, I mean, you answered my question pretty much, the second one I had about like why indoor football in particular. But my next thing I wanted to ask, so of course we're a college football podcast, and of course you're a director of player personnel and scouting. And so all-star games come late in the college football season for me and Jackson, my co-host. It's a favorite topic of ours, of course. And the way that like we have a different look at it. Like Jackson's more of a player personnel guy. I'm more the journalist. So it's funny how like those two sides of the coin are in a podcast. Like he's definitely the player evaluator. I'm the storyline guy. And so with All-Star games, like of course he views it from like the NFL, IFL, UFL scouting perspective. Me, I view it more as like a celebration of college football, for some of them at least. Celebration of college football careers. I guess with all that being said, I feel like it would be interesting to talk about like which All-Star games the Indoor Football League particularly looks at, because I know that there's a hierarchy. I don't know if you guys are scouting maybe some back-end guys or replacement guys in the Shrine Bowl, or you guys focus on like the Hula Bowl and below. I'm just interested to see like how that All-Star game dynamic goes in scouting with the Indoor Football League.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Omar. And, the All-Star kind of scene changes every year, right? Like the two, I would say, go-to events, in the past couple years for our league and mainly for me in general, or specifically, I guess. But, the two events that I would try and hit were, the College Gridiron Showcase and the Tropical Bowl. Now, obviously, the College Gridiron Showcase is still up and running, and that's a fantastic event. They promote our league. They welcome us in with open arms. Mike Riddleman, who heads up their scouting, and is also scouting with the Calgary Stampeders and the CFL. He's fantastic, class act of a guy, and he has that thing, just growing every year. It's been phenomenal to see, and we've actually gotten a decent number of players out of that event. And then the Tropical Bowl was, of course, the other one, right? And unfortunately, Michael Quarty, the founder of that game, passed away. Rest in peace to him, and God bless him and his family. But that game, what was also kind of a nice blend between, there were some guys who might get like an NFL rookie minicamp look, but then most of these guys were, going to be in that UFL, CFL, IFL pool. And that was something I quickly identified, over time. A couple years ago, I actually did an internship with the Hula Bowl. And of course, having worked with that game, I understood that, a lot of that was NFL undrafted free agents. Again, eventually guys that would, come around to the UFL or the CFL. Maybe not quite as many, at the IFL level that you would be able to get immediately. But that's, of course, changing nowadays, right? So this year I went to CGS again, but without the Tropical Bowl, I pivoted to the American Bowl because I thought that, that would kind of be a direct replacement. And turns out that it's not. And the reason I say that is because I felt that when I was scouting at the American Bowl, the talent pool there was actually really good. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple, guys from that game that end up being, draft picks potentially in the 6th or 7th rounds. I was talking to, some different scouts, whoever. I have a lot of connects in different leagues. And the general consensus we reached was that, the pool was just as good, if not better, than the Hula Bowl. And obviously that's a topic to be debated for this year specifically. But, it was interesting to get insight from that. And I still didn't view it as a waste of time, right? Because with an operation like this, sometimes you're thinking multiple years out. So if a guy, is a UDFA in this cycle in 2026, signs an NFL contract, he might still become available in a year or two after he goes through the CFL or the UFL, can't latch on to an NFL practice squad, whatever it be. There's all sorts of different, cases and things that can pop up. And I'm always looking for, these not giveaways, but maybe these little quirks in the process to where, I can focus on a guy. And even if I know he's going to go somewhere first, again, UFL, CFL specifically, I can kind of gauge like, well, he might be in our vicinity quicker than somebody else.
I think that's a really good point that I didn't consider about looking a couple years out, because when you mentioned that, the name that came to my head immediately, Talia Tagovailoa, of course, like played in the Shrine Bowl of all games, and then ended up in the IFL, and then of course now he's back in the UFL. He's up in the UFL playing for the Houston Gamblers. But that's an interesting point I didn't consider about looking a couple years out. The American Hula Bowl whole debate, it's interesting because I mean, okay, like I don't have any information. I don't have any inside information, but I know that there's things going on from what I've heard, just like little murmurs. So it's interesting to see those two games kind of fight for the same type of player, like you mentioned. But I figured you would mention the College Gridiron Showcase. I know that one has a lot of guys statistically that get overlooked. And for me this year, I actually went to the Dream Bowl since I'm out here in Oklahoma. And
that's another good one. Yep.
Yeah. Great one. To be honest, like the game being at Cowboy Stadium, because I looked at it as a fan slash like rider perspective, like that took the cake for me, because like in my eyes, like the College Gridiron Showcase it's a hard concept for me to grasp, where it's a couple of days of, I guess, OTA type things, and then I know that they have like a live game, but it's like not exactly a game. But I mean, perhaps you can like explain that better since you've been there. But the way I saw the schedule that was like passed down, the way I've heard it talked about when I talked to Jose Jefferson a few years back on the HBCU Pigskin Showdown podcast. I don't like mentioning that just with how that game ended up, but he mentioned that it was essentially like live rep based and not exactly game based. But for me, that's like a tougher sell from a journalist perspective. But I mean, I understand the talent. It's a tightly run ship, and it's just a great pool of just players to evaluate.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think, you bring up a lot of great points there. I think CGS, I would say it's ultimately pretty personnel specific, right? Like, I think what you have to realize about these all-star games is that, most scouts don't go to the actual game, right? Like, they're mainly there just to see the practices. And so CGS realized that early on in the process, and they kind of toned down the game to where it's just more of an advanced scrimmage. And I appreciate that, because I think it just gives you, they can work more guys in, you're not missing anybody, right? Like, everybody that's there gets an actual chance to compete. And, I think the most important part for me when it comes to evaluation, I care a lot about the character component. We'll get into this later when we start talking about the team itself, but, we've hit on a lot of high character guys, and we've taken chances on, some of these guys who maybe had a history with something, but it's still panned out because we were able to do the correct background checks. And at CGS, I would argue that the access that they give you, whether you're, a scout or a journalist, whatever it may be, you're allowed to sit in the interview room. There's no time limit, with players that you can pull. And that's different from what I've heard to, compared to some of the bigger games like Senior and Shrine. And obviously that's very beneficial, for me because I come in with, questions, and we obviously, it's kind of like what we're doing here right now, right? Like we'll sit down and I might have questions, but then it might go in a different direction and we just start having a conversation about something completely different. And so being able to just sit down with those guys in not a casual environment, but one that's structured enough to where, I can get all the players I need in one sitting, I think is very, efficient and beneficial. And again, just friendly to people like me who, need to get stuff done and obviously want to look at, a lot of the players that are at this event. Like I thought it was fascinating, like I told you, I mean, as a journalist, it might be harder to grasp, but there's a guy, JC Abbott, he works for 3 Down Nation, which covers the Canadian Football League. And he comes to CGS every year and they let him sit with all of us, at the tables and interview whoever. And obviously he's interviewing all the Canadian guys. That's the other thing too about CGS that's interesting is it attracts a lot of people from the CFL because they bring a lot of the CFL draft eligible players to that event, which these other, all-star games have not historically done. Of course, Taylor Elgersma got called up to the Senior Bowl last year, and that was a big storyline. But he started at CGS, right? And he was also at Tropical. I mean, he hit like every game on the circuit. And that's kind of, of course, he's in the UFL now at the Birmingham Stallions. But, the point being is there's a lot of different avenues with that game specifically. And I think they just do a really good job at, catering to these niche areas that some of these all-star games, and no disrespect to them, they're just not as familiar with it, right? Like when I turn up at CGS, I get recognized. I'm in the IFL. When I came to the event this year, they knew that we had won the championship, and that was kind of, they could use that as a marketing thing. And so we build off each other. And I think that that's extremely important in a business that's driven by network and connections, right?
Yeah, I think you just gave a good advertisement for me to go to the College Gridiron Showcase next year if I'm still out here in Oklahoma. Yeah, like for me, like I guess typically with All-Star games, like I like the destination, right? I've always been a destination guy as a rider because as much as I want to fight it and as much as I know it's not true, I like believing that some semblance of the old days still exists where it's like players get a reward like going to Hawaii for the old Hula Bowl to, as a cap to like a great college career. So for me, like the Dream Bowl is just easy to say, okay, we got a bunch of lower division players getting to play at AT&T Stadium. Like that's a reward, the best destination, I think, for any All-Star game. But the College Gridiron Showcase too, I mean, I'm fascinated by it. I know that they invited one Army, or I think it was one Army guy. I think it was Andon Thomas. I don't know if you had the chance to talk to Andon Thomas. Great linebacker, but I wanted to do both, but with the baby and the wife, it was hard. I had to pick one. I know that Fort Worth and Frisco, Fort Worth and
hey, we talked about it, man. The work-life balance, right?
Yeah, work-life balance. Yeah. So hopefully next year, though, if the Dream Bowl doesn't invite someone from the academy, I'll be there. But I think that's just a really good point too, just about the networking, like you said. And I mean, and as you mentioned too, like the partnership with with the XFL and the IFL, like networking, it's everything as as you put it in this industry, from a scouting perspective. So something else I wanted to ask just about evaluation is what have you seen as the toughest aspect of transitioning someone from playing the outdoor game or 100-yard game into playing 50 yards, less players in the field, like 8-man football? Like what is the toughest transition toughest part of the transition? We can go by skills, linemen, we can do skills and linemen, even quarterbacks, like position by position. Like what do you think is the toughest part of transitioning for, I guess, each major skill group?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, it varies a lot, right? It's very position focused. I think, if you want to start on the offensive line, obviously in the indoor game, we have 3 offensive linemen where, in any other setting, it's 5 guys, right? You have a center, 2 guards, and 2 tackles. Well, in, the IFL, we have a center, and then we have 2 guys on the side of that, which, can be guards, can be tackles. I find that, the guys who, if we bring them in and they played guard in college, sometimes it's a harder adjustment just because you go from, being on the interior to now technically being on the outside. Like you're technically a tackle, right? There's nobody, else, to kind of stop, pressure from coming in. So I think, that's definitely something that I've noticed over the years is, I think the specialty comes in when you can find like like a swing guard or a tackle, right? A guy that's kind of played both, was maybe outside, they kicked him inside, and even better if he's played on both sides of the line. Now, obviously, that's difficult, right? I mean, a lot of those guys, just because offensive line, I mean, that's like one of the most scarce positions in football. Those are the guys who, even if maybe they struggled in college at times or they had to get moved around or they weren't always starters, those guys still tend to get NFL looks just because, I mean, again, Omar, like how many guys are, 6'4" plus, 300 pounds plus? I mean, it's just such a small number, that grow naturally, that can maintain, a weight like that, or, obviously height is something that you can't really control if you want to go there too. But yeah, that's definitely one that I kind of noticed immediately was like, okay, like, with offensive line, I think we have to do a bit more grunt work than some of these other leagues just because, guys, again, it can take longer for them to adjust. But obviously, when you're building from the line first, whether it's offense or defense, you can't spend all the time in the world waiting for a guy to just develop. I mean, you need guys that can come in and really, get going from day one. Of course, that sounds a bit counterintuitive considering we're a developmental league, right? But, with offensive lines, sometimes you find success in guys that have already played in the 8-man format for a while. And a lot of our offensive line, at least this season, is mostly veteran guys, who have at least had a year under the belt in their league. So that means we can kind of get going quicker. And I mean, I don't have to tell you that without an offensive line, nothing really gets going. I mean, your quarterback's not going to be able to throw the ball. You're not going to be able to run. Both of those are critical in any league, including ours. And that's definitely where my mind goes to. So.
That's interesting. I didn't consider just the fact like when you shrink the offensive line, you essentially change a guy's position. That's something I didn't consider. And I guess another question I have with the line now that you bring it up, I guess I've never been a guy that pays attention much to the line play. I played corner in high school, so I'm naturally like looking at the skills like most fans are. Really, most
And
fans
we'll
are.
get into that too, right?
Yeah, but like, I guess, is there any like pulling? Are there any like complex, I guess, lineman like maneuvers? Like, do you look for agility really?
Yes, but again, agility is, I think, a trait that a lot of other scouts are also looking for. And so when I find an agile lineman, who might not have, all of the, physical attributes in the world, that guy is still probably more likely to get picked up by the UFL or CFL before I can get a hold of him. Whereas, I can still get a guy who's like 6'6" or 6'7", and get him in. And even though he has the better physical attributes, we kind of have to teach him, how to move better. And obviously, the indoor game, a lot of that will come naturally just because all the plays are happening at a much higher rate of speed typically. And yeah, I mean, that's about what it is.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So another question I have regarding positions as well while we're on this. So what is the toughest adjustment you think for running backs and receivers in this game? Do you think the shrinking of the field is just an incredibly difficult thing for them, or is it something they just kind of just get used to?
I mean, I think, running back's a fascinating one, man, because this is where I think we really do differ from some leagues where, we're looking for guys who can run, and catch the football equally. And sometimes those guys might even have more of a receiver mold, than a running back mold. Like, look at the guy we brought in this year, okay, Josh Tomas, the reigning offensive player of the year from Bay Area. That's not a big guy. When I look at that guy, he's not a power back, but he achieves the balance that we're looking for really well. And of course, we had to replace Antonio Wimbush with him, and Antonio was built more like a power back. We got him from the Iowa Barnstormers, but he was also, somebody who, could run and catch the ball equally well. And he has, I think, more traits, to where he could get up to the CFL, which he now has done with the BC Lions. He signed a contract up there. And of course, there's a guy, a bit of a story here, not to, deviate from the question, right? But when you look at Justin Rankin, right, you might be familiar with Justin Rankin. He's playing up in the Canadian Football League with the Edmonton Elks. That guy has developed into a top 10 running back in the CFL, but I don't think that happens if he doesn't, play in the IFL for, I think he was in our league for 3 years, played with Bay Area and Frisco, and maybe another team, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And when we look at like running backs, like it's kind of like, who can we get that's, close to Justin Rankin in terms of, dynamics, again, agility, and then, a lot of that too, like, I mean, when you want to talk about a do-it-all guy, special teams is also really important. That was a critical factor, I think, for, us bringing Tomas in this year was, Wimbush was so good on special teams last year. We needed a guy who, again, not only had that balance, but, could also return kickoffs and be very efficient, set us up well on the field. And, we felt like he could do that. And so far, it's been a success. But again, those guys don't grow on trees, right? And sometimes I think with that position, you're thinking a bit outside of the box because, there might be a guy in college who wasn't taking snaps all the time at running back. Like he might have been more of a receiver first, or at least that's what he was labeled on a roster. But when you're watching the film, it's like, okay, I can see the speed. I can see how this guy cuts. We could potentially, bring him in as an RB1, still have him catch the football out of the backfield, and it could potentially work. And so, luckily with Tomas, again, another guy, he had played in Bay Area. He had already been in the league for, I think, 2 seasons with them. And so he was already kind of acclimated. But, even if we were looking for somebody else, I guess, you could kind of expand your resources there a bit.
Yeah, so I guess you're telling me as an Army fan that, one of our slot backs would fit right into to the,
potentially, yeah.
So yeah, that's something that's interesting because I think a lot of casual fans of the indoor and arena game, we'll just say the 50-yard game, when they think about the running back for a team that plays 50 yards arena or indoor, they probably think a power back because that's what was made the most popular. That's the archetype that was the most common in the arena league. I think the popularity of the indoor league is just so young relative to how I guess the staying power that the arena football league had. So it's weird adjusting to, and even for me too, to hear like a guy like Josh Tomas is like the ideal back. But it makes sense because you want a guy that's shifty. It seems the field's smaller. You want a guy that can make cuts in an alley like that. So that's something that I just didn't really consider as much. And it's kind of like a hard mental block to get past.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, building off that, right? Like it also depends on the offense that you're trying to run. I mean, we could bring in, my first year there in 2024, we had Wimbush and we had Tarian Taylor, who played D2 at Tuskegee. And, that was more of like a prototypical power back guy who, maybe wasn't as good at catching the football, but we, still had a use for him. In the years since, and especially this season, we've been throwing the football a lot more. We have a lot of trust, in our young quarterback, Jaden DeLaura, who is quickly becoming one of the best in the league. And we can get into him more later too, obviously. But it's all about, how you want to, piece things together. And obviously our offensive coordinator, Curtis Chin, if you look at the system that he has in place, I mean, it's one of the most dynamic that you can get in the IFL, right? I mean, we want, all different types of guys doing all different types of things. But most importantly, you got to be able to catch the football. That is a, top priority for us. And, I don't think we would be bringing in a guy, in the building if we weren't confident that he had, the right hands to fit our system. So
that's a good point. I think bringing up Delora it's a great time to bring up Delora. I think, of course, before we transition past player evaluation and more into like the big picture of the team. So the big money, of course, the quarterback, right? So I guess what are some things that make quarterback evaluation in the indoor football league different than say you'd evaluate a quarterback for the UFL and maybe not the NFL, but I guess for the UFL or like the 100-yard leagues.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we do follow a lot of what you're seeing, in the NFL right now in terms of the model. I think we're always looking for guys who, again, it's kind of that balance like we talked about with the running back, right? You want a guy who has a strong enough arm, but when a play breaks down, can also get out of the pocket and be mobile. I would definitely say, we prioritize mobility more than anything just because, especially with rookie quarterbacks too, right? Because they're going to come into this and the game is going to be a lot faster than they expect. So if they come in with a lot of mobility, it's easier for them to get going quicker. And I think that's what happened with Jaden, right? He was able to do some scrambling and he wasn't the most mobile guy in college, right? But, he learned the system really quickly. And so I think that, kind of enabled him to just use his feet better, maybe better than he was even doing when he played at Arizona. And that's been really good to see, right? Again, he's a perfect fit for what we want to do. But obviously there's a lot of different shapes and sizes when it comes to quarterbacks in our league, right? Like you've got the prototypical, 6'5" type of guys, 230, whatever, that kind of just sit in the pocket, and it's all right here, right, with your arm. But then you have some other guys who are, I would take like our former quarterback, Jerome Johnson, who's now playing for your team in New Mexico, right? Like that's a guy, slimmer frame, maybe not, he's got a quick release. I don't know if he's got the strongest arm in the world. But man, is he mobile, right? Like, I mean, you watch that guy move. I mean, that's why he won the MVP in 2024, is because when a play break down, he could always get out of it, right? And he's one of the most shifty, elusive guys that I've seen really at any level. Of course, there's reasons why he might not be a guy who advances to, say, the CFL or the UFL. But he's really good for the indoor game, and I think not to get too off topic here again, but I think for New Mexico, considering they're an expansion franchise, even though it's technically just a revival of Duke City, I think when you bring in a guy like Jerome, obviously that lays a really good foundation for them. And you've seen that in the first couple games this season where, they're 0-2, but they've been competitive, right? And Jerome still looks like a guy, that he hasn't really lost a step despite, not playing nearly as much for us last year.
I'm just glad how you tied that all together, because that was kind of like my next topic I wanted to cover from a team building perspective, right? So, as a New Mexico Chupacabras fan, right? So, I recognize that our payroll might not be as big as a lot of teams' payrolls. Like, it's definitely not as big as Orlando Pirates, probably not as big as the biggest KnightHawks. So, like, from what you've seen from other teams in the league, and then like what Vegas is doing, I guess, how do roster building philosophies differ from based on like payroll, and like you're a small market team like the Chupacabras versus you guys, where it seems like you guys have like deep pockets, big market team?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, man, ties back to the point we were talking about earlier with connections and network, right? So with New Mexico, obviously, they hire Kyle Moore Brown to be their head coach. Great guy, by the way. Obviously worked with him the past 2 years, and, wishing him the best as he, continues this new journey. But you kind of see how Kyle, can at least lay a foundation. Like, he might not be necessarily a personnel guy. This might be, relatively new to him, because he hasn't been sitting in the top chair for a while. But, Kyle has the ability. He built relationships when he was in Vegas. He knows Jerome. He knows a lot of the depth guys that we had who we weren't planning on bringing back because we want to bring in some new talent, right? So he can take some of the depth guys, for example, like the receiver, CJ Jefferson, the defensive lineman, Maurice Jackson, even the kicker, Ben Derby, who was a guy, crazy background on him. His story is wild. He was like NAIA soccer player turned football kicker, and he was doing some good stuff for us last year. I think it took him a while to really get the hang of things, but he was close to some deuces there at the end of the season, and we were really proud for him just because, that kind of development is obviously, again, what this league is all about. But to really harp on your point, like, yes, the more established teams are always going to have, better ability to go out and get players. And I think, even more now is the teams who have a guy like me, not to, just not to just look like I do everything, but teams who have a dedicated personnel employee, or at least an assistant coach, that's doubling as a personnel guy. I think that is now starting to become very critical in this league, because I do think that the recruiting has become more competitive in the past couple of years since I've been a part of it, because there was a time, right, maybe 10 years ago in the IFL and all these other arena level leagues where, the pool was a lot wider because the UFL didn't exist, right? And I mean, the CFL was still a thing, but when you think of, the UFL's got a few hundred players, and a lot of those guys are, again, players that were fresh in the NFL and, in recent draft classes. Like, it's just, it only gets more competitive year after year. And so I think your ability to, continue to adapt and improvise and understand, like, okay, where's this guy going? Do I know his agent? Those are all very critical components to making sure that your roster is always going to be the way that you want it to be. Because if you rely on, just kind of guys from the past too much, like, oh, I'm just going to take this player because I knew him from wherever. And you do see that sometimes in these leagues, right? And sometimes it works, admittedly, if you got a system in place and whatnot. Of course, I just gave New Mexico credit for taking, some of our players, and I think it will, ultimately get them a couple wins here soon. But that's not always the best strategy. And I think as time, continues to move forward, and as these leagues continue to grow and develop and expand, the pod is only going to get more. It's only going to get more tense, right? Like there's only going to be more people fighting over the same guys as you kind of find out that recipe. And so I'm grateful that we kind of got a little bit of a head start. And I do think that's why, we were able to have like such a good core, which eventually led us to the championship win last year. But I think there's a lot of dynamics, with that a lot of people from the outside looking in just wouldn't understand. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to like understand from the outside in, you're like from what I see from a fan, because my journalist caps off. I've never been a player personnel guy, but I acknowledge the challenges that a team like the Chupacabras have, being a small market. Frankly, I hate to say it, low fan support, compared to like the Orlando Pirates, who seemingly pulling a big name college player out of the woodwork every other week, it seems, and so it's interesting too to see how, because I had no idea, like I'm not as much in the know in terms of like coaches and relationships, but when I saw that the Chupacabras pulled Jerome Johnson out of like free agency, I was shocked. I was like, I had to do a double
And
check.
he was supposed to actually go over to Albany and be in the AF1, which you wonder in a different timeline what that would have looked like, because of course they just, Albany just lost Sam Castronova, who's one of the best quarterbacks at this level, and now they're going to have to start a rookie, so that's a whole separate thing too, but definitely a good point.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I mean, but I mean, now it makes more sense with the connection too. So that's definitely something that I'm just gonna keep my eye on. Like, I guess as I look more at these team moves, uh,
Mhm.
related to Jerome Johnson. So something that I guess my college eyes see, excuse me, when I watch this league, I notice the just proliferation of just great HBCU quarterbacks, and I love the history of college football. The history of college football, it's pretty much like ingrained in a lot of pieces I write. So like especially I do a lot of coverage of HBCU football. I'm not a graduate, not an HBCU graduate, but I respect their contributions to not only college football but the pro game too, in terms of the insane amount of talent that they've contributed to the NFL, especially the quarterback position as well. So a lot of people that follow the NFL know that there hasn't been an HBCU quarterback drafted since I think Tavares Jackson in 2006. There hasn't been one to start a game since Tavares Jackson in whatever year he last started a game. And so looking at the indoor football league, seeing guys like DeQuan Neal out of Elizabeth City State, seeing guys like, of course, Jerome Johnson out of Bowie State, who followed another great quarterback in Amir Hall that only got to throw one pass in the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl. Still something that just doesn't sit right with me, but that's another topic, for different podcasts. But also to Felix Harper, just showing off out there in Fisher's Freight, Alcorn State alum. From what you've seen in the IFL, do you think the league takes its role as like a developer, as carrying the torch of these HBCU quarterbacks? Do you see the league taking that as a point of pride, or is it just something where these guys just fall into the league and they just ball out?
Yeah, I think a lot of them, just end up falling, into the league because they're naturally at that level that we're scouting, right? Kind of lower level FCS to Division II. I'll tell you this, though, man, if you want a good story about HBCU stuff, kind of touching, on the point from the beginning of the show, we harped on the All-Star games. Last year, I hit the HBCU Legacy Bowl was another one I went to, right? And, didn't really know what to expect. Obviously, there's a wide range of guys there. I mean, that's, again, there could be a couple, who end up in NFL camps. There could be a couple who might not play pro football at all, right? And I've kind of seen that, over the years following that game. But I remember scouting that game, and there were a couple guys that really stood out. And one of them was actually a quarterback. We're on the topic of quarterbacks here, HBCU ones. Draylon Ellis from Tennessee State. I love this kid. When I went to go watch him, he was a guy that I tried to recruit in the offseason when we were looking for a backup quarterback. We ended up signing two other guys, one from NAIA, one from D2, and both of those guys are currently, developing. Actually, one of them, Anthony Garrett, played at Glenville State this past season, is 26 draft eligible, which also gives you an idea, right, as to some of the guys we're looking at. We can take guys before that NFL clock starts, just because we can sell them on that development component. But anyway, going back to Draylon for a minute, loved watching this kid at the game. Thought he was dynamic, wasn't polished, right? Like, knew he was going to be a guy that would have to come to our league if he was going to be anything as a pro. But that's obviously what I'm trying to find, right? I'm trying to find the guys who, number one, could come to the league right away. And then, of course, there's these other guys that we already talked about who maybe, a UFL or CFL team will give them an opportunity first, or possibly the NFL. But Draylen, really sparked my interest. Tried recruiting him in the offseason, just didn't really work out. He ends up getting signed by Tucson, right? And now he's the starting quarterback in Tucson. And we, just played Tucson, got our first one of the season. That's a kid that can compete, right? And I'm thrilled that, he's getting this opportunity. I view him as somebody who can kind of be next in line to all the guys that you mentioned, the Felix Harpers and the Jerome Johnsons, a guy that, can be in this league for potentially multiple years and continue to develop, potentially, be one of the top, offensive players, just generally speaking, in this league, not even quarterbacks, because of how dynamic he is. Of course, he's got a long way to go. He's only been, the starter for 2 games. But you see a lot of flashes from him. He's learning, and he's been very open about that. But, that's one that I'm proud of because, of course, quarterback is such a hard position to hit on. And so when you see a kid like that, get an opportunity, even if it's not with the team that I work for, just seeing him get a chance to start and, to what you were talking about, kind of continue a legacy or lineage in some ways, that's extremely important, right? And that's also what this league is about and what we harp on all the time. So.
Yeah, just one more thing about legacy. I mean, I feel like I have to, just being the nerd that I am with the history. Like, I like watching Daquan Neal because one of my favorite stories from the old USFL, I'm talking the 80s USFL, is John Walton for the New Orleans and Boston Breakers. I think so. He had played in the Continental Football League, which, welcome back, Continental Football League. But he played in the CFL, the Continental Football League, World Football League, and I think his last game was like with the Eagles in like the late 70s. And then someone told him to hop off the couch, play for the New Orleans Breakers, and he churns out a couple of 3,700-yard seasons, 3,700-yard seasons from Elizabeth City State, the same schools as Daquan Neal. But also, too, on that point, it's like not even like those HBCU quarterbacks playing quarterback in the league, like though, like I've seen a league, or at least a couple of guys, just play other positions and just show that they're just true footballers. And I know that there's a stigma between switching positions, especially coming from HBCU. But like guys like Skylar Perry on Green Bay, guy that I was fond of when covering him in college, when he was in college. And then my favorite, Trip Harrington, out there for Tulsa. Like Trip Harrington, yeah, like
he's a real gem. I scouted him when he was coming out from I think it was Langston in the NAIA. Yeah, that kid was a real find. I tried to keep him a secret for a couple months, but guess what? Other people found out, and that happens a lot. So
yeah, and I think he was a secret because like I don't like taking credit for any of this, and I'm not trying to do that here. But we so Jackson on our podcast, we've had an HBCU Player of the Week. I want to say since like 2021. We've been doing the podcast for so long, so we adopted that pretty early. So we've had HBCU Player of the Week with the intention of like bringing their eye to the HBCU Pigskin Showdown when it existed for a couple of years. So like late October, I picked then Larry Harrington for my Player of the Week after he had an outstanding passing day, and then 5 or 6 days later, he accepted his invitation to the HBCU Pigskin Showdown. He was one of only 2 quarterbacks that had stayed for that game because the game was poorly run. And then, of course, he goes to the HBCU Legacy Bowl and does what he does now. So, like, you saying that he was definitely like a diamond in the rough is true because, like, Langston, I mean, I live in Oklahoma, honestly. You really have to, like, look and find some of these schools if, like, in general, as a college football fan, just the way things are in Oklahoma, it's just a state of just a lot of small towns and a lot of only game in town type college, and that's what Langston is, and that's I'm just glad it's working out for him because I love the way Frisco used him. I mean, I haven't really watched much Tulsa, but I can only imagine they're using him in the same way. I know that he's catching some connections from TJ.
He's doing it all. I mean, again, we talk about versatility in this league, right, and the ability to be dynamic. I mean, he's made an impressive career for himself. Like, he kind of went from throwing the football to catching the football, and now it's like, hey, whatever you want me to do. And I don't know the kid personally, so I'm not going to speak for him. But again, another guy where it's nice to see him, develop over the past couple of years. And I'll tell you, on the topic of HBCU quarterbacks, I don't want to ramble on about this for too long, but you've brought up a very niche subject, and I'll tell you, man, that the one guy I really liked was Davius Richard coming out of NC Central. And it's a real shame. Obviously, he had signed to play with Houston in the UFL, retired last year before the season, and I wish I could have seen him play because I think he would have been a great pro quarterback. And I was kind of, again, you don't want to take credit for anything, obviously, but I was kind of telling people like, hey, I think you should go watch this kid. Like, he might be something. And unfortunately, it never really turned out like that. But kind of one of those what could have beens, right? And again, I think he still had a very impressive college career that we shouldn't forget. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a fun ride in 2023, just covering him and that team. Yeah, it was a fun ride for sure. He was a great quarterback, different type of quarterback. I mean, just some of the stats he put up. But it's just a shame. Like, I love my All-Star games, and it's, I guess, going back to a way earlier point too, where I've come to grips with the realization that the practices are more important than the game. The game is for the business aspect of the entity itself. They have to sell tickets and raise money to maintain operations. But man, yeah, like you mentioned, Davius Richards, it's a shame because he got hurt in an All-Star game on a design quarterback run, which
Yep, that gets forgotten a lot too. I mean, again, back to the All-Star game point. I mean, that was one of the more, I think, pivotal moments in recent memory. I remember watching that game and I saw what happened to him, and I thought, boy, I hope that's not serious. And unfortunately, it was. And that's, yeah. I mean, you hate to see it, of course.
Yeah, breaks my heart because he's amazing. He sure was something. But that was the last topic that I had scheduled for our discussion, Evan. This has been a really great and insightful conversation for me, just as a fan perspective, also too, and like just my writing and just how I view the indoor football league and the arena football league. But before we end, Evan, do you have anything final you want to add? Anything related to the NightHawks you want to promote? Just the floor is yours, whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, man. I mean, I guess I could say a couple things. Of course, I'm excited, for the 2026 season. We're 2 games in. At the time we're recording this, we play Jacksonville this weekend. It'll be our home opener. We raised the championship banner. I'm just so fortunate, to have been a part of this, for the past, couple years since, got hired in 23 going into the 24 season. I tell people all the time, even at this level, this is kind of the opportunity of a lifetime. And what some people don't realize is when I was hired in 2023, I was only 19 years old, and I turned 22 on Saturday. And so, that's something that I hold very near and dear to my heart, is that somebody still took a chance on me despite me being so young. And of course, a lot of people my age, they go into college personnel, and I know you're a college football guy. So you think about all these, student assistants and whatever, grad assistants. But I don't know. I never thought that was the route for me. Obviously, I'm still in college. I'm about to graduate in about a month and a half. But things weren't really materializing there. So I pivoted, right? I focused on the pro game. That was what I kind of knew better. Even if the IFL was still kind of a foreign concept, I took a chance on it, and taking that chance has led me to, some of the best things in my life that have happened, in the past couple of years here. And so just wanted to, say I'm grateful. I love the league. I think, the league as a whole, not just what we're doing in Vegas, but there's a lot going on, man. I mean, you obviously follow this stuff pretty closely, and, seeing what Jared Woodman, our new business director, is doing, or getting some deals organized. And obviously we are having the inaugural IFL Cup this year out at the American Dream in New Jersey. And I should be there for that game. I'm kind of finalizing plans for that right now, since I do work remotely a lot of the time, but do want to get up there for that, since it's kind of a, another pivotal or monumental moment for the league. But it's just been amazing, man, to see the growth and to see so many different kids, whether they've been on our team or, with other programs in our league. It's been amazing to see them develop. We've talked about that a bit here tonight. But it never gets old. It never gets old when a player comes up to you and says, hey, thanks for this, thanks for that. Guys remember you, even if you're in kind of this, in this background role. And of course, what's nice about this league too, is because everything can be so hands-on if you want it to be, I've developed a lot of great relationships with the players, and obviously, we have to keep business as business, but, I do care a lot about these guys on a personal level, and I do care about their growth, not just within our locker room, but obviously outside of that, and once football ends, my job, I think, is to continue to help these guys in life, and, wherever else they might go in football, right? Because we've had a lot of guys, I don't have to tell you this, but we've had plenty of guys that have advanced to the UFL and the CFL, which we didn't touch on too many of those here, but it should be stated that I'm very proud of them as well. And yeah, man, I mean, ultimately, I appreciate you having me on, and it's always good to talk ball with guys who with guys who get it, right? Guys who know things and follow them closely. And I know that you kind of like me, you have that knack for specifics, and I always appreciate people like that. So
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you being flexible, Evan, and just sharing some knowledge. Just like honestly, just taking time just to dump some knowledge. Honestly, I'm hoping that the people that watch this just take more of an interest in the indoor football league or just any league in general, whether it's like the AF1 or any. I don't know if I said a bad word, Ranty, saying AF1. I don't know if how people talk about.
hey man, they're doing their thing. Listen, I mean, you want to talk about AF1? I mean, two of our players from the championship team that we had last year are over in Albany right now, and so I watch that league with a close eye, just like everybody else does, and I think their product is a little different, right? Like some of the rules they follow more of the traditional game, where we're almost just like the CFL, but on a more condensed field. We've got some more I guess things incorporated from like the NCAA as well. But yeah, man, I mean, it's a little bit of a different product, but obviously we compete for players too. There's a lot of overlap. I'll tell you, I mean, I was just going on a little spiel about how I know all these guys in the IFL. I mean, plenty of them over in AF1 too. So
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, like great products all around in the 50-yard game, and though for those watching,
totally.
is watching, like just check it out. A lot of it's accessible. The IFL has a weekly game at least for free on Yahoo Sports Network. I mean, it's right there. I mean, if you have a smart TV like most Americans do nowadays in the year 2026, like you can watch the IFL, you can watch AF1. The Arena League's coming soon, so like you can watch TAL ball on YouTube. Plenty of just football in general. You don't have to whine and mope that there's no football until August, but Evan, again, thank you so much for this insightful look. Really appreciate it. I hope we can get you on another time too. Just maybe leading up to the draft process next year, just another time close to just the All-Star Game circuit too. Just have you back on for the All-Star Game circuit, just get your point of view. But thank you again. Until next time, everyone. I mean, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for just whenever I get stuff out other than the writing. Been focusing more on the writing in the off season. But until next time, everyone, peace, lumps on the Burger Popper.